Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be discussing the gains from specialization and trade based on the theory of comparative advantage. Now, if you're new to this video, subscribe to my channel, and I would also suggest you to watch my previous video, which was on the theory of comparative advantage, before you proceed with this video. So let's get started. So basically, I've given two countries, country X and country Y, and they are producing two goods, that is watches and calculators. So the maximum that country X could make the watches are 40 watches and 40 calculators, or 40 calculators basically, because this is the maximum that they could go. Depending upon if 40 watches are made, then 0 calculators, and vice versa, right? And country Y could end up making 15 watches maximum with 0 calculators, and 30 calculators with 0 watches. So if you can, so from this maximum number of calculators and watches that these both countries can make, we can calculate the opportunity cost ratios. So if 40 watches could be made by country X by foregoing 40 calculators, so the opportunity cost is 1:1. For each watch, you need to forego one calculator, and for country Y, for each watch that you make, you need to forego two calculators. The simple reason is that for 15 watches, you need to forego 30. So for each calculate watch, you need to forego two calculators. So simple math, right? So you did that. You find out the opportunity cost ratio. That's the first step. Now what I've done is that I have sort of drawn a PPF as well, to sort of indicate you a graphical illustration of this as well. And what I've done is that I've taken calculators and watches on the Y and the X axis respectively, and this is the PPF for country X, representing the maximum calculators 40 that could be made, and the maximum number of watches 40 that could be made. Now let's say that if you want to, now you need to understand that the PPFs represent the opportunity, the slope of the PPF. The slope of the PPF is representing the opportunity cost ratio, because if you look at this entire triangle, this is representing the slope, right? The change in the Y axis over change in the X axis. So so let's say that you're making 40 calculators. If you forego these 40 calculators, which is change in Y, then you make 40 watches, right? So 40 over 40 is 1:1, right? So that is the opportunity cost ratio. So remember that the points on the PPC, the points on your PPC, PPF, is basically the slope between those points. The change in the Y over change in the X is basically representing your opportunity cost ratios, right? The slope of the PPF is representing your opportunity cost. That is your marginal opportunity cost, basically, for each additional unit of good X, how much Y is foregone, right? So let's say that now, hypothetically speaking, we assume that, let's say, country X is making 24 watches, right? So this is the PPF. Country X could make a maximum 40 watches with 0 calculators. So let's say that country X is right now making 24 watches. And if it's making 24 watches, then how many calculators will it need to sacrifice? It will need to sacrifice 24 calculators. Why? Because for 24 watches, it has to sacrifice 24 calculators, since the opportunity cost ratio is 1:1, right? So if it forgoes 24 calculators, it ends up making 16 calculators, because 40 minus 24 is 16, right? So and if you look at, and you can also calculate the opportunity cost ratio from this small triangle as well, because this is also representing the change in the Y over change in X, because this is change in Y, this is change in X, and change in Y is 40 minus 16, that is 24, while change in X is definitely 24. So 1:1. So again, this slope is basically representing your opportunity cost ratios over here, right? So right now, country X is making 16 calculators and 24 watches. Moving forward to country Y can make a maximum of 30 calculators with 15 watches. And right now, let's say, and the opportunity cost ratio is 1:2, which means for every watch that this country makes, it forgoes two calculators, right? So this could be seen by this bigger triangle as well, that for 15 watches, that is change in change in Y30 upon change in X, 15 watches, positive 15 watches minus 30 calculators would again give you 2:1 ratio. That means for every watch that it is making, it is sacrificing 30 calculators, which could also be seen from this triangle as well. I'll just show you in a bit. So first of all, let's assume that the country Y decides to make 10 calculators, right? It's like, I'm going to make 10 calculators. So if it's making 10 calculators, then we know that if it makes two calculators, it forgoes one watch. So if it's making 10 calculators, then how many watches will it forgo? It will definitely end up foregoing 5 watches. So if it's, let's say, if a maximum of 15 watches could be made, then 5 watches would be foregone. So it would be making 10 watches, right? So with 10 calculators, country Y is making basically 10 watches. So this is the current production of country Y. 10 calculators, 10 watches. And if you look at this triangle as well, this is also giving you the opportunity cost ratio. That is minus 20 calculators plus 10 calculators, 20 over 10, 2:1. Same thing, that for every for every 10 watches, the country sacrifices 20 calculators, which is 2:1 simple ratio. It's telling the same thing, that for every one watch, you sacrifice two calculators, basically, right? So right now, country Y is making 10 watches and 10 calculators. Now, before that, I also wanted to sort of let's see that from this opportunity cost ratios, could we sort of find the comparative advantage? Now we can clearly see that country X opportunity cost ratio is 1:1, while Y is 1:2. So it means that for every one watch country X makes, it only forgoes one calculator, while country Y forgoes two calculators for every one watch. So definitely country X has a lower opportunity cost in making watches because it forgoes less calculators than country Y. So country X should focus on watches and specialize in watches because it has a comparative advantage in watch production, right? And then country Y has a comparative advantage in calculators. So remember, I told you a trick as well in the previous video that you don't sort of need to calculate the opportunity cost ratios, but this trick is good for MCQs. If you look, I've drawn the PPFs for these two countries, and this is representing the maximum potential for both these countries. The values have already been extracted from the table, and the trick was that I told you that you need to calculate the highest distance between these two PPFs and see where is the highest distance lying on which axis. So right now we can see that the highest distance, or the biggest distance, lies on the x axis, that is the watch axis. So if first step is to identify the biggest distance between these PPFs is on which axis. So we see it's on the x-axis, that is the watch axis, and whichever country is producing the maximum watches on that country on that axis has the comparative advantage in that product. So definitely we know. So we need to find out who has a comparative advantage in watches now. So country X has a comparative advantage in watches because the maximum watch it can produce is 40. So this is a small trick without calculating the opportunity cost ratios, right? And we've already identified as well country X has comparative advantage in watches. Okay. So now moving forward, what we have over here is that we have country X and country Y, and right now we can see that before specialization, 24 watches and 16 calculators, while 10 watches and 10 calculators are being made by X and Y respectively. So the total world output, assuming that we have two countries producing watches and calculators only, so let's say the total world output right now for watches is 34, while for calculators it is 26, and we're going to see that after specialization and trade how this would change. Now guys, what I've done over here is that for both the countries I've taken their opportunity cost ratios and I've made an opportunity cost ratio diagram. So these lines are just representing the opportunity cost ratios for both these countries, that for every watch they produce, how many calculators respectively they each have to forgo. So now the purpose of doing this is just to make you guys understand how to calculate a mutually beneficial trade ratio for both these countries. And why is it said that the ratio should be between these two values? So for example, we know that if country X makes one watch, it has to forgo one calculator, right? And this is exactly what the slope is telling us. We've already seen it in the above diagram, that the slope of X PPF is giving us the opportunity cost ratio of 1:1, right? And we need to understand that it would be beneficial for X to trade with Y only if X is getting more than one calculator by giving away or exporting one watch. Because the thing is that, as the ratio is 1:1, it simply means that X could end up making one calculator itself and forgo one watch, right? It can do this by itself. So if it actually wants to trade with Y, then there has to be something. What value is Y bringing in for X, right? So if it wants to trade with Y, then definitely country X should get more than one calculator by giving up or sacrificing one watch. Because if it's not getting more than one calculator, let's say it's getting less than one calculator, then what's the point of entering into the trade with country Y? Because the thing is that if it's getting less than one calculator, then it was better off making the calculator itself by sacrificing the same one watch. Same goes for country Y as well. If you look at country Y, the opportunity cost ratio is 1:2. And the slope of the Y's PPF shows that for each watch Y makes, it gives up two calculators. We've already seen that in the Y's PPF as well, that how the PPF is representing the opportunity cost ratios, the triangles that I showed you. So if Y wants to indulge into trade with X, so guys, you need to understand that trade would only be beneficial for Y if it gets one watch, right, by giving up less than two calculators. Because the thing is that if it has to give up more than two calculators, if it's giving up more than two calculators, then Y would be worse off in that case, since it could produce the watch itself for just giving two calculators, right? Trade to be beneficial for Y has to give up less than two calculators or export less than two calculators in return for a watch. So you need to understand why are we sort of saying that for Y the ratio should be in the sense that what Y gives up has to be less than 2, right? In the same way, why are we saying that for trade to be beneficial for X, it needs to get more than one calculator basically. So Y needs to give up less than 2 calculators while X need to get more than one calculator. So why not X and Y shake hands on something on a ratio in between where they trade for each watch, they could end up trading, let's say, 1.5 of a calculator. This would satisfy both, because such a ratio would mean that it lies between their opportunity cost ratio. So a trade ratio of 1 to 1.5 would be really beneficial for them, right? Because yes, that is what it is, right? So what I've written over here is that if the exchange ratio is 1 is to 1, if the exchange ratio is 1 is to 1, X won't trade and X will not accept the offer, right? X will definitely not accept the offer, because what's the point of trading when these agreement terms are also available domestically as well, based on domestic production. There's no point in trading. There's no incentive in trading with Y. X could just make one calculator and just sacrifice one watch, right? But Y will accept this offer. Why will accept this offer? Because this offer will benefit Y. Why? The simple reason is that, for Y, we just said that Y should at least give up less than 2 calculators. And in this ratio of 1 is to 1, Y is giving up one calculator, right? So it's sort of benefiting Y, but it's not benefiting X. Such an agreement is not mutually beneficial for both, and hence such an agreement will not take place. Similarly, if you look at the exchange ratio of 1 is to 2, now X will agree to it. Why will X agree to it? Because definitely X is getting more than one calculator. X over here, X is getting 2 calculators in exchange for a watch. While domestically, it could only, by sacrificing one watch, it could only end up producing one calculator. So here it's getting 2 calculators in return for one watch. So X will agree to the offer and accept the offer, right? Since it gets more calculators in return than what it could make domestically. But Y will not accept the offer because it does not find any real meaning and incentive to trade. Why? Because it doesn't make Y better off in these terms. Because like we said, for the trade to be beneficial for Y, it will only be beneficial for Y when Y gets one watch in return by giving up less than 2 calculators. And over here, Y is giving up 2 calculators in return for a watch. It's not beneficial for Y. Although it's beneficial for X, but not for Y. So for trade to be mutually beneficial, it should lie between the opportunity cost ratio. So at times they also use the word exchange ratio, trade ratio, terms of trade as well. So here the terms of trade, we are not referring to the index, price index of export, average price index of export over import price. What we are referring to on what terms these trade is taking place. That is what is the exchange ratio. Now guys, we'll mathematically prove that whether David Ricardo was right or wrong, and whether this theory of comparative advantage actually works and makes countries better off or not. Now guys, before specialization in trade, we know that X was making 24 watches and was making 16 calculators, that is making and consuming both, right? And Y was making and consuming 10 watches and 10 calculators. So the world output was 34 and 26 respectively. Now, we have already established the exchange ratio of 1 is to 1.5. That is, for every one watch that is exported, 1.5 calculators will be imported, right? Now guys, let's assume that X exports 12 watches to country Y, right? So what happens is that if X is exporting 12 watches to country Y, then as per the ratio 1 is to 1.5, if you export one watch, you get 1.5 calculators. So 12 times 1.5 is 18 calculators. So if X exports 12 watches to Y, it gets 18 calculators in return from Y, right? So now let's see that what is the position after specialization and trade. So what happens is that if X is exporting 12 watches to Y, then X is only left with 28 watches and he's exported the 12 watches to Y. And then in return, what is X getting in return from Y is that X is getting 18 calculators in return from Y, right? And since Y was making 30 calculators, so 30 minus 18, because it gave away 18 calculators to X based on the trade ratio, it's only left with 12 calculators, right? So if you see, the post-trade position is much better than the pre-trade position. So the world output has gone up to 40 watches and 30 calculators. Initially, the world output was 34 watches were being produced and consumed in the world by these two countries, and 26 watches were being produced and consumed by these two countries. What we can now see is that X was also producing 24 watches, but now it is producing and consuming 28 watches. So it's producing more watches and consuming more watches as well. By the same time, X is also consuming more calculators. Initially, X was only producing 16 calculators. Now it is also consuming 18 calculators. 18 calculators are imported from Y, but still it's consuming more calculators. So X is better off because now it has more watches to consume and more calculators to consume as well, right? Same goes for Y. Y was producing 10 watches and consuming 10 watches and 10 calculators. Now Y is basically producing and consuming 12 watches, but at the same time, it's also consuming 12 calculators, right? So X gets 4 more watches to consume and 2 more calculators to consume, and Y gets 2 more watches to consume and 2 more calculators to consume. Right? So both countries are better off after trade. And the world output also goes up from 34 to 40 watches and 26 calculators to 30 calculators, right? The world output is rising. At the same time, the welfare goes up as well. So both countries are better off trading. So guys, one thing for sure, the consumption possibility has exceeded the production possibility. So we need to now represent the consumption possibility on a trading possibility curve. And we're going to learn what a trading possibility curve is. So guys, a trading possibility curve is simply a line that is drawn outside or beyond the production possibility curve. So for example, let's say that I have apples over here and I have oranges over here, right? And I can, let's say, make 30 apples, and let's say the maximum oranges I can make is 20. Now, if I, and this is my PPC, right? So if sort of I, let's say, do not, if I compromise on all the apples, if I make 0 apples, then I'll make 20 oranges, right? So the maximum production for oranges could go is 20. It cannot exceed 20, right? So that's the maximum oranges I can produce and consume if I compromise on all apples. But let's say that, I have a comparative advantage in apples. So now what I do is that I specialize in apples and then I trade it with another country. And if I trade it with another country, then let's say if I export all my 30 apples, I am specializing in apples only. And if I'm exporting all my 30 apples, then in return, let's say I am getting maybe, 25 oranges. So if I was sort of foregoing these 30 apples, I could have only produced 20 oranges. But now I am only focusing on apples, and then I'm exporting apples, and in return I'm importing 25 oranges. So I'm, consuming more oranges now. So you see how my consumption possibility has exceeded my production. So the maximum production possibility for oranges was 20, but now my maximum consumption possibility has exceeded beyond 20 now. So the consumption possibility is more than my production possibility. So the trading possibility curve is simply representing the combinations of points that are possible on that trading possibility curve, that is representing my consumption possibilities, that has only been made possible because of trade, international trade and specialization. And that is definitely more than my production possibilities. So I can see every point on the purple line is more than the red line, which is my PPF. So I am definitely consuming more than at each point on the trading PPC. I'm consuming more than trading possibility curve than what I was previously producing on the PPF, right? That makes the countries better off. So guys, remember that a trading possibility curve has to definitely be beyond the PPC. So if this is your PPF, then a trading possibility curve has to be like this, right? And if, let's say, if this is my PPF, and let's say I am sort of exporting all the goods on the x-axis, that is, I'm exporting good X and importing good Y, then that is, I'm foregoing good X, then my trading possibility curve will start from here, and this would represent a higher consumption possibility for good Y. So it has to be beyond the PPF, right? If the trading possibility curve is like this, let's say if this is my PPF, and this is good Y, this is good X, and my trading PPF is somewhat like this, then trade is not beneficial at all, because it simply means that I am foregoing all of this Y and now only getting less of X, importing less of X and consuming less of X. Well, before I could just have not made Y at all, foregone all Y, and instead consumed this much X. So the trading possibility curve cannot be inside the PPC. Otherwise, the trade has made worse off for that country, right? So the country was not better off trading. So you see MCQs like that in your MCQ papers. So if I look at the trading PPC for country X, the red line is representing the trading possibility curve, and each point on this curve represents consumption possibilities for country X that have been made possible only after specialization in trade. So guys, let's say that if X gave up 40 watches, it could only produce and consume 40 calculators. So if you give up 40 watches, then you can produce and consume 40 calculators, right? So the maximum you could go up is still here, right? On the black PPF. But now if you sacrifice 40 watches, you can actually maximum import 60 calculators, because 40 times 1.5 is 60, because your trading ratio is 1:1.5. For every watch, you get 1.5 calculators. Definitely your trading possibility curve is representing your consumption possibility being beyond your production possibility, right? So this is representing an increase in potential of consumption. So the trading possibility curve has to be beyond the PPC curve. That should represent a consumption possibility being, exceeding the production possibility that did not exist pre-trade. If the curve is below the PPC, it means the country has not gained from trade and is worse off, just like I told you guys. And for country Y as well, you can see that Y is also better off, since, if you look at the PPC for Y, if it forgo 30 calculators, it could, maximum consume only 15. If it forgo 30 calculators, it could consume only 15 watches. But now, by foregoing 30 calculators maximum, let's say, it could end up importing 20 watches now. So the consumption possibility is more than the production possibility. So guys, we can see that our pre-trade position was how many watches? We had 24 watches and 16 calculators, 24 watches and 16 calculators, 24 watches and let's say 16 calculators. And let's say now the position is that we have 28 watches and 18 calculators. So 28 watches and 18 calculators, definitely we have more watches, 28 watches, and we have more calculators as well. So definitely point B is representing the consumption possibility, which is more than the production possibility of A. Same goes for country Y as well. If you see at country Y, the production possibility curve shows 10 watches and 10 calculators. So we have, for country, we have 10 watches and we have 10 calculators. So 10 watches would be somewhere here and 10 calculators would be somewhere here. So 10 and 10. And now how much is being consumed? 12 watches and 12 calculators. So 12 watches and 12 calculators would be like somewhere over here. We have 12 watches, 12 calculators. Now this is not a graph paper, so this is just roughly drawn. So we can see that the consumption possibility, again guys, is more than your production possibility. So that's it guys for this video. I hope you enjoyed the video. Now in my next video, we're going to discuss that if the opportunity cost ratios or the slope is exactly the same for both the countries, so trade would be beneficial, or whether they should enter into the trade or not. And probably we'll discuss 1 or 2 questions in that video as well. So stay tuned for that video and do comment if you like this video. I'll see you all in that video. Till then, take care.